appreciate you coming out of the sunshine and as the days are getting shorter and joining us for this discussion of mental health and depression and recovery. Especially want to thank my friends at NAMI Ohio. They've been blessings that's brought me here tonight and allowed me to share my story with you. So I want to acknowledge that and express some gratitude for that. I've had definitely some pain and some difficulty, and in the past, mostly in the past, but still I feel sometimes that I'm living in the shadow of mental illness or the shadow of past mistakes, the shadow of some shame. And this kind of sharing opportunity is an opportunity to sort of unpack that and release it. I think the more we talk about mental illness, the more we can get rid of that stigma and set all of us free and make recovery something that's happening more and more and growing in our hearts and homes and communities. So yeah, today I'm grateful. I wake up most days with hope, knowing that I'm part of this larger recovery movement that has brought a lot of magic into my life and the life of so many others. So a little bit about my background. I grew up in the Cleveland area. I'm the youngest of 6 kids, traditional Irish Catholic family. By all appearances, I had a normal childhood. And I always have kind of felt that sort of tension between appearance and reality, and I think my family is kind of built that way, that keeping up a certain image is very important, keeping up a clean image, never tipping your hand if something was going wrong. And we didn't talk about issues, we didn't talk about things that might be going wrong, sadness in our lives. So that was always a big theme for me. Let's see. I grew up with a mother who had depression, and she went for help in the 60s and 70s, and what was available at that time was Valium. She was not able to run a house and raise 6 kids with Valium. It kind of knocks you out. And so her answer was to just kind of muddle through. And I remember seeing her lying on the couch and her face would be wet, and I would ask her what's wrong. Well, my allergies are acting up today, or my eyes are watering, that kind of thing. And as I grew up and I experienced depression, and I'm more one to talk about things, I saw that very, very slowly change in her. And on one occasion, I'll fast forward here for about 30 years, I'm living with depression. I'm working in an environment, as Tom mentioned, I worked for a supportive housing agency in Toledo for 10 years. The mission was ending homelessness for folks with mental illness. And I decided to get a bunch of people together to go see an Indians game. My mom is a big Indians buff. My friend Richard at the agency was a big Indians buff. I knew all the stats, so I bring him along. And Richard happened to be someone who lived with schizophrenia. I had written a success story about him in our newsletter. And I did not prep him or my mother for each other. I just got everyone together for this game. But Richard's very open. He kind of surprised me, and he says, well, yeah, Mary, I've lived with schizophrenia all my life, and I was homeless for a while, and this is how people like Peg and NPI helped me get on track. And I thought, ooh, this will be interesting to see how my mother responds to this. And she kind of stunned me. She said, oh, Richard, I kind of understand. I've lived with depression my whole life. I had postpartum depression. It's just such a difficult thing. And that was the first time I'd ever heard anything like that out of my mother's mouth. I was 30-something. So it's thrilling to be alive now when help is available, treatment is available, and we're allowed to talk about these things. How did I get from A to Z? Again, I've always had this feeling of contrast, that if I talk about my resume, I could show you a good work history. I'm blessed. I've never been hospitalized or had a suicide attempt. I've gotten some awards here and there for different things, taken a lot of leadership classes. So I guess that's my family style, at sort of keeping up this positive appearance. And I really found in working for nonprofits I've done mostly communications and marketing in my life, and I found that working for nonprofits, I was so inspired by the mission and so inspired by helping people and seeing a change in someone's life, seeing a change in the way they carry themselves because they're finally feeling heard or getting their needs met that maybe haven't been met in the past. So I've had a lot of good in my life, and I'm painting this picture because later I'll get into some stuff that isn't so bright and shiny, and so that contrast will be more clear. So I always had this sort of Wizard of Oz feeling, like what's really happening behind the curtain. And there was a lot of pain, a lot of struggling, and depression. And for me, depression sort of takes two forms. Especially as a child, it wasn't so much a feeling of obvious, pure sadness. It was more just like a shutting down and a not wanting to, sort of a feeling of never wanting to be here, real restricted consciousness. And I can't even tell you how many times strangers would say to me as a child, "Oh, little girl, you look so sad. What's the matter?" And I really didn't have an answer at that time, not one that I could ever articulate for years. And I remember at one point my mother saying to me, "Well, honey, why are you crying?" I didn't know. "Well, you can't just cry like that. You can't do that. You can't cry for no reason." So I kind of learned that culture in my family of just kind of muddle through and you just sort of move forward. And that's what I've always done, like my mother did, just move forward and do what you can do and muddle through. What else did I want to talk about? One thing that went really well in my childhood was structure and dependability. My father was an engineer, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. We lived in the suburbs, Cleveland area, and they both had a lot of wonderful qualities. If I was told I'd be picked up after school at a certain time or after basketball practice at a certain time, they were there 100% of the time. We had dinner as a family every night at 6 o'clock. Certain things in my background went really, really well. My mother was very kind, and especially when I was young, her love was really sustaining for me. We just had this closeness, I think because I was the youngest, and I was behind the pack by 5 years. So we just had this really tight relationship, and she was really thoughtful, one of those thoughtful mothers who would never forget your birthday. In fact, she'd always have a bunch of gifts bought and wrapped, and she'd make a cake, and there'd be ice cream, and what's your favorite meal, honey? I'll make you that tonight. A lot of special times there. And my father was amazing. He could fix anything. 6 kids, a lot of cars. Between the car and the home, I don't remember ever having someone external fix something that belonged to my father. It just didn't happen. He was an engineer, he was a fixer. So, I get married later to a guy who can't fix anything. I'm like, what? Are you serious? That was the whole Y chromosome thing. Anyways, so I'm going along through life. I liked school pretty well. I had decent grades, and I always liked creative stuff. My oldest brother played guitar. I had to play guitar. I wrote poetry, sang, and my family had a lot of funny childhood moments. My maiden name was Flynn, like Errol Flynn, and we had a lot of moments of what we called the Flynn sense of humor, which is kind of quirky and rebellious. At one time, my father gave me the job of painting this picnic table, and I didn't like my father. He was rough and kind of a bully, and a lot of issues there, but I said, "Well, all right, what color do you want me to paint this table?" And he said, "I don't care." And so he goes off, and I'm in the garage, and we had a lot of paint. He was a handy guy. So I painted each board a different color. And this was like this bright rainbow-looking thing. And I used this blue stuff for the benches, which I didn't realize at the time was boat paint. So, and he accepted my effort. He didn't criticize that, but this boat paint wasn't made to stay on a surface. It was made to keep mildew off the boat in the water. So every time we sat down and got up, all summer long, we had this blue paint on the backs of our legs. That's a kind of a fun memory. A little bit of dark humor in me. I made fortune cookies once for my family. They were oatmeal cookies that I'd smash paper into. And the messages were all like ridiculously dark. You will die within the hour. That kind of that was funny to me. And to my favorite brother. I had a second oldest brother in the chain. I'm not going to go too much into siblings because there are 5 of them. I don't want you to lose track. But my favorite brother, always sort of the alienated intellectual one, very quiet, shy, not real comfortable in his own skin as a kid. And the big story my mom would tell about him was taking him to the circus one day, and he's in her lap. And they were right up front, and this big old lion is there with a lion tamer, and the guy sticks his head in the lion's mouth. My brother looks at it, and my mom's like, "Oh, isn't that exciting?" And my brother yelled at the top of his lungs, "Fake!" And the whole circus like stood still, and you could hear the crickets. But that's always been Mark. He's a challenger. Nothing is good enough that he can't prove or touch or. Anyways, a lot of funny, silly moments in my family. And then there was sort of more the life behind closed doors. My mom with her depression. Both my parents were daily drinkers. My dad being kind of a bully. And again, very little discussion of self-care, emotional literacy. I was kind of left to my own devices, and I guess we all were, just as far as coping with difficult things. And, you know, like with depression, my mom tried to get help. I think when she asked her mother what to do with depression, she said to her mother, "Nobody loves me." And my grandmother's answer back to her was, "Well, Mary, you need to read books. That's the way to." That was her answer. Like, occupy your mind, go elsewhere mentally. So I think I got the best that they had to offer. You know, coping skills weren't that strong in that way. Moving on to high school, I kind of fancied myself an intellectual. I enjoyed challenging the teachers and telling them they were philosophically inconsistent. I developed a talent for binge drinking. I kind of lived for the weekends. Dabbled a little with drugs, but I really liked alcohol. And I fought with my parents a lot. They always wanted me to slow down. I always wanted them to admit that they were evil. We never really saw eye to eye on those topics. And I felt like the black sheep of the family for a long time. But my favorite brother, Mark, the fake yeller, he always felt that he was the black sheep. He did a lot of drugs and crashed the family car a few times. He was always on his own page. You know, everyone would be in bed and he'd be up, staying up late watching old movies or old obscure things on TV, black and whites. He was always keeping to himself. So we never did resolve the black sheep title, really. We're still arm wrestling over that one. I also had a lot of hobbies in high school, the music, and I liked my poetry. I was editor of the school paper. And I liked stalking this kid I had met at summer camp one year. My English teacher, Ms. Tier, she was the one who drew me into the school paper. She helped me apply for a scholarship to Kent State, and I was really elated. It was a total boost for me when I was able to go away to school and put some space between me and the family, because that was a huge goal for me, and I did have a really good experience at Kent. That was a great fit. So when I look at the roots of my depression, where does this come from? I do have good genetics for it. My mother struggles with depression, and generally in my family, her siblings, her side of the family, a lot of anxiety, depression, and addiction disorders. So that was, the predisposition was certainly there. For me, depression has also been intertwined with trauma, and that trauma has been intertwined with family secrets. And so this has been the most difficult part of my story. Not just secrets, but really profound differences between my siblings and myself. Me at the youngest of the pack, them older by 5 to 12 years. In my early 20s, I opened a real Pandora's box by talking about my father's alcoholism and the sexual abuse I remembered experiencing as a child. And that didn't go over well. That wasn't something that anyone wanted to talk about or believe in, and that sort of opened the door to a really tough era of my life that went on for a long time. So I don't want to dwell on too many details, but I will say it's a horrible thing when people when you love and depend on don't believe you. But when one person does believe you, the brother who yelled fake at the circus, who stayed up late and saw our father get drunk out of his gourd, When one person believes you, it makes all the difference. I was estranged from my family for about 8 years in my 20s. And on one level, during that time, I felt pretty liberated. I felt like, you know, I'd come out of the closet in a sense. And I, for the first time, well, once I kind of got over the fear, like what are my parents going to do to retaliate? Once I realized that I was free to roam the planet and live my life, I realized I was free within my own mind in some way. I felt really opened up and free. On the other hand, it was traumatic. I felt like I had an organ ripped out. And for the only time in my life, I remember vomiting in the middle of the night or randomly during the day for no reason. It was just that level of stress. And I really dislike the expression, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Really, in my experience, it sometimes just really damages your psyche. Am I more insightful because of what I've been through? Do I have more empathy, more willingness and ability to help others? Yeah, I do. Am I stronger? That's a tough sell. I don't think so. Anyways, that era of my life is also when I got to know and became very close with my ex-husband, my now ex-husband. If you want to speak on dysfunctional relationships sometime, I'll come back, but right now I'll just say we were together for 13 years, good, bad, and ugly. And when I met him, I felt like he was catching me when I fell, and he taught me how to smile again, and that was a really important bridge for me. And we were together for 13 years. Like I said, we parted ways in 2004. So that was basically the foundation of my life as a young adult. That's what I started my career with. That's, a little bit of a full plate psychologically, you might say. And I struggled. Obviously, I really struggled. Depression and anxiety, mostly depression. I have the classic symptoms of depression, the negative thinking. My mind just wants to focus on personal failure and what mistakes have I made, and my mind wants to tell me, because this and this happened before, nothing good will happen in the future. I am stuck right here. So that's been really hard. I have an ongoing love affair with sleep. That's been hard to manage sometimes, and I guess again I would sort of alternate between these eras of just being very shut down and crying, or really feeling the pain and having a lot of distress that way. But I always muddled through, and I think my career was a saving grace a lot of the time, because I had something to do that gave me structure. I like structure. Well, I do well with structure. It gave me a safe space emotionally sometimes. But I love to write. I'm solid as a writer. I always brought something to the table, which is a blessing I'm thankful for. So that was something that was sustaining. I worked for a Gannett newspaper for a couple years, and after that I wanted to kind of expand my horizons. As a reporter, you work all ridiculous hours and kind of skipping by on not much salary. So I thought I'd make a move to the lucrative area of nonprofit PR. And it actually was a big improvement pay-wise, and the hours were much more regular, so that was helpful. I worked for the equivalent of HAPCAP here. I don't know if you're familiar with HAPCAP, but they do HEAP, Head Start. So I'm up in Fremont, Ohio, called WSOS, for Wood, Sandusky, Ottawa, and Seneca counties. I was there for 5 years, and I grew a lot there. I mean, the depression and some of my other issues filtered in. I had some relationship problems. I had some different challenges, but I also did a good job. I was the first PR director that they ever hired, and because I had worked at a newspaper, I knew how newspapers work, and I had relationships, and I enjoyed that, a lot of that. And it meant a lot to me to know that I was helping people get really essential services, child care, parenting skills, heat in the wintertime. I did the newsletter, so I had the privilege of interviewing all the folks who were doing well. The social workers would be down in the trenches doing the really tough work, and I would get to sort of put a bow on the box at the end of the day and say, God, look what we've done. And that was always really inspiring. So then, for a variety of reasons, I wanted to get my master's degree. Part of it was that my favorite brother has his doctorate. I don't want a doctorate. I mean, that's for geeks, right, Tom? But I wanted an advanced degree. Well, yeah, I wanted to pursue this, and so I pursued an assistantship. I didn't know I'd be filmed, so I'm trying to edit things a little differently than I thought I would. But it's great. I'm glad we can reach more people, and mostly I'm an open book. So from this job that I held for 5 years, where things were very stable and I was comfortable and did well for the most part, I decided to apply for an assistantship and get a master's in marketing and business from Bowling Green. Another huge blessing that worked out for me. And that's when my mental health problems really kind of hit me in the face. That it became harder to muddle through. It became harder. And I think some of it was, you know, the older you get as a young adult, you're sort of carrying this heavy baggage for a longer and longer time. And I think the farther I got from different toxic situations in my childhood, the more the demons kind of feel like, okay, I'm safe here, so I'm going to take over. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how it felt. So I go from the structured job, unstructured grad school, much more difficult than I expected. I could have moments of arrogance in my life, and this was one of them, thinking, wow, you know, I didn't do well in math ever in high school, but I wasn't trying. I was drinking, I didn't care. So if I'm trying, I'll be a whiz, of course. That really wasn't so much the case. I muddled through. I mean, I'm very stubborn. I got the degree, but I think I was probably studying 5 to 10 hours for every hour the Asian engineering students in the program were in these business classes. But the real challenge was my relationships. Something about the unstructured time and the not anticipated stress level being so very high. I don't know. I can say that I ended up having an assistantship where, you know, you start and everyone's kind of happy. Everyone's sort of a kumbaya situation. Because you're the assistant, you're not a threat, right? But somehow by the end of that first school year, I was barely on speaking terms with half the department. And I think some of it was me being arrogant and sort of stepping into politics. Maybe I didn't even realize it. And some of it was I was in a toxic department and didn't realize it. So anyways, I muddled through grad school. But that era of my life was painful enough that it drove me into help. So I guess the silver lining there is suddenly a lot of different forces sort of converged, and I realized this isn't something that I can do on my own. And I had always been open to counseling, and I had done many, many things to try to help myself manage depression and anxiety. I was into jogging, I was into yoga, meditation. I took St. John's Wort. I joined Toastmasters, which is a confidence builder. A lot of things I tried to do, watch my diet, whatever. But what I needed was meds. And another piece was I needed social support, and I didn't, at that time, realize, I mean, my friendships, I think my self-knowledge wasn't there enough to allow real friendships to happen. I mean, if you can't tell someone what's going on with you, you're not going to have a lot of soul talks with people. And I think I misread my marriage, and the loyalty factor in my marriage wasn't quite what I thought it was at the time. Anyways, so at that point, the appearance and the reality weren't so different. They all kind of sucked. But again, as that, having an impetus to get me into help, which was what I really needed, was amazing. I mean, that was the turning point where my life suddenly became manageable. And so I finished the degree and ended up working for the Mental Health Board in Lucas County for 3 years. And that job was perfect. It was part-time, it wasn't too much stress, and I was allowed to be what we called a consumer, someone who lives with mental illness. And I started being able to integrate all the challenges and baggage I had with the rest of my life. You know, I didn't have to have a public face that was strong and completely free of any mental defect. I could breathe, you know, I could be in the moment, I could have the kind of relationships that I had needed all along, where if I need help, I can ask for it. And I started getting to know myself on a level that would allow me to do that. So that was the start of kind of a miracle for me. I worked for the board for 3 years and then went to this supportive housing agency where I worked for 10, and by the end of my 10 years at Neighborhood Properties, I was full-time. I'd had significant raises and promotions. I was sort of back professionally, and along the way I'd gotten familiar with consumer-operated services or peer support, which I think Athens does a really nice job with. I had gotten familiar with the recovery movement. I had gotten familiar with NAMI. Was very involved with the NAMI walk. I coordinated it 1 year in Toledo. And in all of these different environments, I noticed and found people who had just been through the ringer so much and had a kind of humility, but also had a kind of strength. I guess they call it resilience. But there's something that happens when you go through this process of feeling like you lose everything, and you can kind of come full circle, and it's such a profound relief to feel like you're on solid ground and you're not going to fall anymore. It's humbling, but it's beautiful, because today I know that I'm where God wants me to be. Today I know that I'm a child of God. Today I know that I'm okay and the work I do has value and I feel safe. So a lot of things to be learned. Specifically what worked for me in my recovery, I think today they call it cognitive behavioral therapy. The philosophy that this therapist had was that feelings follow thoughts. And so on kind of in a more obvious way, you might look at someone who's waking up in the morning and having a really bad day right from the start. They wake up late, their dogs peed on the rug because they woke up late, and the day's shot, so hell, I'm just going to stay in bed. This day is shot, it's ruined, I can't do this. And so you can see how the thinking takes a negative situation and makes it so much worse. And the therapist that I was working with kind of taught me to do that on a much more subtle level, where, you know, okay, I'm really just not comfortable with this guy George I'm working with. I don't know what it is about him, but he's threatening, I'm uncomfortable with him. Well, maybe George reminds me of somebody else who, I don't know, it could be anything. And that kind of thinking, just bringing that stuff up to the surface, allowed me to understand what I was doing in the relationships, which had been a constant challenge for me. What was I doing in work relationships to make them more competitive and less cooperative, what was I doing to destroy the safe space that I wanted to create? And that's a big thing too. That's huge as far as being able to build a solid foundation for your life. That's one of the most powerful things that you can do, and I'm really grateful for that. I also did EMDR, which is the eye movement therapy, and it kind of works, if you're not familiar with it, it's sort of like a traffic type light, and they've got a blinking light that flows back and forth, and it puts your mind in a space that resembles rapid eye movement of sleep. Somehow it just has a really healing effect. I'm not sure they know why, but for people with trauma in their past, it does a good job of bringing things up and allowing the brain to kind of integrate things that have been sort of stuck. that were holding you back and you couldn't move past. So that was a really helpful thing too. But if I had to rule it down to two things, I would say for me, medication was extremely important, and just having real supportive relationships has been extremely important. Today, my friends tend to be people who are also advocates. Along the way, I've made some great advocate friends, and I've learned that my favorite people on earth are the people who are working in the streets, in the shelters, who are making a difference and really shining a light of hope for people who just don't have any. I have a good friend, Steve North in Toledo. He moved to town. He'd been a minister in some small town, and he just felt that it was complacent, and he wanted to serve in a way that was more relevant, not like a happy, well-funded community, but he wanted an urban environment. He moved to Toledo and ended up working with homeless folks, and at his own expense, in his own home, he would hold a monthly dinner, which he called Lifeline Community Dinner, and it was open to everybody. You would have professors there, you'd have business folks, and you'd have homeless folks all mingling, playing cards, having a buffet. And it was the most uplifting group of people, just the energy and the passion, and people who really found joy and strength in helping others. Ken Leslie, he's more of a public figure. He was the founder of Tent City in Toledo. He's pretty much the same way, very down to earth. Both men have been homeless themselves. My friend Amanda Faith Moore, who started the first street newspaper in Toledo. She's changed life for a lot of homeless folks there. The street newspaper is created by folks who live with, who are unhoused. They put together a newspaper and they sell it to folks for a quarter maybe, and they can go out and sell it for $1. And it's surprising how much these people can actually make. And it rises above the level of panhandling. They actually have something to do that's meaningful for them, that can generate income, and they feel their dignity is back, and they have a little more self-control. And it's a small thing, it's a stepping stone, but the long-term changes in people's lives were profound. And so to meet these people who are working together to bring people a sense of hope, to address the needs of homeless folks, not just the housing and the food and the logistics, but the hope, the feeling like you're not invisible here, and you're a real person. You're not someone we're afraid to touch. That just really moved me, and that's the kind of thing, as I move forward, that's the kind of person I want to continue to be, and that's the way I'm building my life today, the foundation that I have today. I have relationships with folks who are making good change. A lot of us have been through the ringer, and that's okay. What else did I want to touch on? So today I'm happily divorced, the mother of 2 beagles. Interesting, my mother today has Alzheimer's, which is of course a sad and tragic disease. In our case though, I feel like it's given us this honeymoon period, because she forgot. It seems like the memories she lost early on were the really traumatic ones, and my brothers and sisters who didn't believe me had no trouble saying, well, Mom blocked that out. They didn't believe that, that my memories could be right, or that they might have blocked out something painful from the past, but they could say, oh, well, Mom blocked that out. That was too painful for her to deal with. Anyways, I feel like it gave us a couple years where we could just really bond, and I actually felt like it was the way it was when I was a kid, where she was just always delighted with me, and I because I understand her depression and her vulnerability differently now than I did when I was young, I've just enjoyed my relationship with my mother so very much in the last 2 or 3 years, and that was an unexpected gift. She still knows all of our names. We just had her moved into assisted living in late July, and just enjoying it one day at a time, I guess. At some point, she won't recognize us. But it was just great to have that back, to be able to bond with her and not have all the mutual feelings of betrayal hanging between us. So I'm blessed. I have people in my life that I love, a job that I love, and that's about it in a nutshell. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. So was that totally depressing, or was that okay? Yes.
Tell us about some of the medications. What kind of...
Totally depressing, or was that okay? Yes.
Tell us about some of the medications. What kind of success you had with medications?
Okay. So the question was, tell us about medications and specifically what worked for me. I started taking Prozac sometime after my 30th birthday, and it did work for me. I mean, the relief was immediate. In my darkest days, I would have areas of just crying a lot, sleeping a lot, and my mind doesn't go in a suicidal direction, but I certainly had times when death just sounded like such a relief, and I would tend to focus on it as a point of relief. Prozac lifted me out of that, and that was great. What it also brought was a lot of fatigue and weight gain. So for me, the trade-off was clear. I was much better off taking the med. I was never tempted to get off of it because of those side effects. I would have been happier if my psychiatrist at the time had warned me of the side effects. This seems kind of silly in retrospect, but I didn't want to read a big list of side effects because I thought, I'm going to feel every one of those if I read the list. So I kind of ignored it. But after complaining to my doctor for years about how I was so tired, I finally read online that fatigue was a side effect of Prozac. So I kind of felt like, you kind of mentioned that after I complained every month to you. But then I started seeing a different psychiatrist after a while, and she's brilliant, Susan Haley in Toledo. On the tiny chance she's watching, I just love you, Dr. Susan Haley. She shifted things around a little bit. She was always familiar with, well, the latest research indicates this, and this med won't work for you because of this detail in your story. She was amazing. So she helped me to try the cocktail I still take today, which is heavy doses of Zoloft and Wellbutrin. And that works very well for me. Any other questions? Yes?
You said you had a brother named Mark?
Yes.
He said that there's a lot of fakes out there, There's a really roaring lion who they devour. I have a belief in God too, so.
Yeah. Yeah, he was always cynical, always ready to call somebody out. And it's funny, we still have a great relationship. One of my favorite trends between us is we send each other these ridiculous gag gifts for birthdays. When I became a vegetarian, he sent me this sort of spam-looking container, and it said unicorn meats. And I was like, oh, that's totally gross. And so I put it in my boyfriend's cupboard to get a rise out of him. And then I talked to my brother on the phone. He said, well, did you open it? No. So I opened it up, and it's like this stuffed animal of a unicorn, which had been butchered. So it's like the leg. Yeah, pretty gross stuff. And I've sent him ridiculous stuff too. He had a nun whack his hands a lot, like with one of those metal edged rulers. So I was always buying him a wind-up nun toy, and there would be sparks flying out of its mouth and all kinds of ridiculous stuff. So we have a lot of fun with that relationship. Yes?
Do you have to, how do you take care of yourself so that do you have a regimen? Do you ever feel, gee, I better get more sleep, or gee, I better do this or that? Are there any signals that you look for?
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand?
I do. When I'm feeling good, I tend to push, especially in my current job, which is very challenging. I used to, as a metaphor, it's like my old job involved climbing trees. This job involves swinging from branch to branch like Tarzan. It's just very challenging. Yeah, I tend to push. I tend to work a lot of hours. And I notice two things. I get this feeling in my stomach. It's like a tension. It's a very distinct feeling. And I get cranky. I get, this sounds silly. I don't want to cuddle my dogs. I want to sit away from them, and I'm yelling at them. I just want to keep to myself and work, and get everything done. Those are two things, and then usually around that time I notice that I'm not getting nearly enough sleep. And so that's when I need to step back and watch my sleep schedule. Yeah, I feel much better if I'm eating right, if I watch my sleep schedule. I need at least 7 or 8 hours a night. Exercise, I need 1 good workout a week at least. I'd love to do more, but that takes the anxiety down. Yeah, that's a good question. That's always a challenge.
So your dogs,
My therapy
generally,
goals,
are they generally therapy though, or are they?
no, they have no particular degree.
No.
But for me, yes, they're definitely, I call them my therapy beagles. And I actually had a German Shepherd before I had Jake and Roxy, and the Shepherd lived to be 13, and finally I had to put her down, which was sad, but I had thought, well, maybe I won't have pets for a while. It's a lot of extra cleaning, a lot of extra work. I have to run home from work in the middle of the day. But I couldn't do it. There's something about nurturing a pet that puts my head in a certain compassionate, nurturing space, and without that, I'm in a real dark space. So,
The speaker we're going to have a month from now, you probably saw her at Naomi National with Candace True, has what do you call it, a service dog. And
yeah.
her service is, the dog's service is to be with her and reduce her stress. I
right,
think that's kind of nice.
that is.
I find that with dogs.
Mm.
They accept us.
They sure do.
Most of the time.
Yeah, unless I don't have the right treat, but Anything else?
Do you find that certain foods will trigger,
Breakfast.
like sugar, caffeine, that kind of thing?
I do. I love sugar, but if I take in too much sugar, it's weird. I become sort of spacey and fatigued, but also a little bit wired at the same time. Yeah, I have to watch that. And caffeine, anything that has a stimulant effect, I have to take in moderation or not at all. And if I get really stressed out, I'll cut off caffeine altogether. And, well, sugar, I can't say that, I should. But I do watch it.
What about alcohol?
I'm in AA, so no. I didn't emphasize that in my story, but oh gosh, I love AA. Yeah, social support, that's wonderful. Anything else? Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. It's been a really nice experience.
I'm Roger Wilkins. This is an orientation session for the Appalachian Renewable Energy Consumer Co-op. This is the first in a series of co-ops that we're organizing here in the Athens area. We have another one we'll be starting on fairly soon in the Marietta area, and then a third again in the Athens area, but devoted to small businesses. I'm the executive director of the Center for the Creation of Cooperation, and we've been acting as the organizing agent for this and this series of co-ops. As this co-op, AREC, gets on its feet, which is pretty well on its feet now, we're stepping back and the co-op members are taking it over, which will allow us to turn our attention to organizing new co-ops. We see this co-op in Athens as the beginning of the local manifestation of what is really a nationwide phenomena. That is, around the country there are communities organizing renewable energy organizations. Some of them are co-ops, some are nonprofits, but there is a movement. It's a community-supported energy movement that in many ways parallels the community-supported agriculture movement that we've seen over the past decade or so. And we're getting things rolling here in Athens County. Now, there are 5 aspects to the co-op that I want to introduce you to. But first I want to start with the notion that we see the co-op as an intermediary organization. That is, an organization that draws together the knowledge and skills and capabilities of the members, but as an organization stands as an intermediary between the individual member household and the large world of regulations and technologies and different aspects of both energy efficiency and renewable energy. It's an overwhelming, vast set of knowledge and regulations that people have to navigate. And so a lot of people are daunted by that and don't really take the steps they would like to. The co-op is here to help everyone take those steps to gradually become more energy efficient, which makes bringing in renewable energy much more feasible, and then will help bring in renewable energy. So what I'm describing is really the first point of the co-op model, and that is that we use a 2-phase process with each co-op member and with the co-op as a whole. The first phase really deals with energy efficiency, conservation, and behavior change. So we start out with each co-op member by installing a whole house energy monitor that allows the member to learn what their energy usage patterns are, particularly in terms of electricity. And the co-op provides that monitor and installs it and introduces the member to its usage. We're also doing bulk purchases of a variety of energy efficiency items. For example, high quality LED light bulbs. We've done extensive research and we found this American company, Cree, that produces a very, very good product. And so we've done a bulk purchase and we're distributing them to the members at cost. Likewise, we're looking at what are called conservation switches that allow us to plug in our VCRs or coffee makers or anything that is sitting there using electricity day in and day out. This is a little switch that allows us, with just pressing a button, we can turn it off, and so it quits using that phantom load. In the second phase of the co-op, with each member and the co-op overall, we will bring in sources of renewable energy. And we have 3 strategies for doing that. One is that we're working with local installers to find ways to reduce the cost of bringing in individual installations. We're doing both a catalog that shows what all of the installers have available. We're also looking at the possibility bulk installations where we would pool together maybe 10 households and ask the installers to bid on installing all 10 of those at a reduced cost. And they're very interested in that. Secondly, we're doing a pilot microgrid that will tie together about a half a dozen member households with their own supply of electrical power, probably from solar, but we're also looking at micro hydro and wind as a source for that. With the microgrid, it would have the capacity to store a certain amount of electricity in batteries and to detach from the larger grid in the event of a storm that brings down the grid. The third strategy that we're investigating are what are called solar gardens, in which we would find within the community an optimal location for a large bank of solar panels that members would be able to own shares in through a mechanism called virtual net metering. And through the cooperative structure, they could own shares in that and get credit for their share just as if they had those panels on their own roof. So we're pursuing all three of those. The second point about the co-op is that we are in fact organized as a cooperative, which is a means of assuring local ownership and control and participation of people in our own energy sources. We've had a system for the past 100 years in which large monopolies have supplied our electricity, and we had to accept whatever they offered. Now we have this community-based movement, much of which is cooperative, that is enabling local ownership and control. And so we're emphasizing that through our cooperative structure. Thirdly, the cooperative structure allows in-kind member contributions. That is, for some of the things that we're doing with energy efficiency and with installing renewable power, there are things that ordinary folks can do. We certainly use professionals where it's appropriate, but we also create circumstances where members can hold down the costs by contributing their own labor. Fourthly, we're using what's called a shared savings model, where we're financing both the creation of sources of renewable power and energy efficiency programs through the savings that each member realizes between what they would have paid for their electricity if they did nothing and the diminishing cost of electricity because they are doing energy efficiency and renewable sources. So the shared savings are set up so that a small portion goes to the co-op to support the co-op activities, and a larger portion is used first to pay off the renewable energy and energy efficiency measures, and then becomes a source of funds to the member. And most of the things we're looking at will be paid off in 10 to 15 years, but have a life of more like 25 or 30 years. So the member will have free electricity for about half of that period, and then it will be renewable beyond that. So it becomes a mechanism through which people can build up their own capital rather than paying it to a large corporation that takes it out of the community. It stays in the community and builds community wealth. Finally, the co-op is using what is called a social influence model to spread the word. Rather than going on television or buying large ad campaigns, we're recognizing, as the research shows, that people who make this kind of significant change in their life to shift from conventional power to renewable power, they do it because of social influence. They do it because someone that they identify closely with, a friend, family, or neighbor, is doing it, and they can observe that this close associate is making the transition. And so we're doing what we can to enable our members to create an ever-widening circle of influence to bring more and more people into the into the change process. Those are the five elements of the co-op structure. Are there any questions? If not, that concludes the orientation.